Welcome you all to my channel The Social Care Insights. Myself Dr. Inku Bora, Assistant Professor NF College, Guwahati. Today I am going to discuss with you about Ralph Dahrendorf conflict theory. Before going to discuss about conflict theory of the thinker, it's very important to know about the thinker. He was a German British sociologist, philosopher, political scientist and liberal politician. He was also a leading expert on class division in modern society and has been described as one of the most influential thinkers of his generation. He studied philosophy, classical philosophy and sociology at Hamburg University between 1947 and 1952, and he became a doctor of philosophy and classics in 1952. His most influential work on social inequality is Class and Class Conflict in Industrial Society, which was published in 1959. And this book presents in his first detailed account of the problem of inequality in modern post-capitalist society. And his central argument is that neither structural functionalism nor Marxism alone provides an acceptable perspective on advanced society. So, in Dahrendorf's views, society has two phases. One is consensus and other is conflict. Actually, in the late 1950s, Ralph Dahrendorf persistently argued that the Pearsonian scheme and functionalism in general presents an overly conceptual, integrated and static vision of society. As functionalism had focused only on the former phase, that means on consensus, Dahrendorf chose to focus on the other phase, and in this context, Jonathan H. Turner, he viewed the interpretation of Dahrendorf as concentrated in the future not only on concrete problems but on such problems as involve explanations in terms of constraint, conflict and change. This second phase of society, that means conflict, may aesthetically be rather less pleasing than the social system, but if all sociology had to offer were an easy escape to utopian tranquility, it would hardly be worth our efforts. The model that emerges from this theoretical calling is a dialectical conflict perspective, which represents one of the best efforts to incorporate the insight of Marx and to a lesser extent Weber into a coherent set of theoretical propositions. And that's why this theory is very important, because this theory tries to integrate both the phases of the society, that is consensus and conflict. And to understand the society, both the phases are important. In this theory, Dahrendorf mostly mentioned about the conflict phases of the social system. So, according to Dahrendorf, social organization are imperatively coordinated associations rather than social system. And this theory that is developed by Ralph Dahrendorf, this is based exclusively on the relations of authority, and where he discussed about authority. Actually, here he said that according to him, social organizations are imperatively coordinated associations rather than social system. It is the authority which is an integral part of every social organization that creates different interest groups in the society. And one interesting thing, that authority structure, which is an integral part of every social organization, it leads inevitably to the crystallization of interest group and inherent possibilities of conflict. And he said that authority does not reside in individual but in position. That means what the position that an individual possesses, on that context, in that context, on the basis of that, the authority of individual can be determined. It is not on the basis of individual, but it is on the basis of position that an individual may possess. On the basis of that, he may get some authority in the society. And he is interested in studying the larger social structure where the origin of conflict lies, particularly in the social roles played by an individual endowed with expectations of domination and subjection. And therefore, authority is always attached with position, and position is associated by superordination and subordination. So, this is the very important analysis made by Dahrendorf. In this context, he said that authority structure, it is always involves the relation of superordination who are in authority, subordination who are under the superordinate people. Superordination, this is the ruler, subordination, they are under the subordinate people. So, sorry, superordinate people. So, this is the authority structure. And those who are in authority, that means the superordination, because of the position given to them, are expected to control the subordinates. And this subordination is the result of the expectations of those who are around them, not because of their psychological characteristics. And therefore, authority, it resides in position, not the persons. So, this authority structure, it defines rights and obligations, prescribes sanctions, and it enforces conformity. And it is very interesting to mention here that he said that these groups, that is superordination and subordination, both the group have opposite interest. Those with authority, that means the superordination, they want to maintain their status quo, and those without it, they want to change the structure of authority relation. So, these groups with collective interest are finally called the conflict classes. Therefore, this is very important that actually I mentioned, I have drawn a diagram to understand the theory of Rael Dahrendorf in a very easy manner. That here authority structure, it means superordination, that means they who have authority, subordination who have no authority. These two groups made the authority structure. Both the group has opposite interest, and it ultimately leads to conflict. So, if you see Dahrendorf interpretation again, that according to Dahrendorf, conflict operates within imperatively coordinated associations of society. Imperatively coordinated association, that means ISA in short, over question of power and authority. And the conflicting relation operating within the ICA, which units of social action, such ICA would be SARS, CESLAP, etc. And since each ICA is related to other ICA within the same society, therefore, conflict may be both intergroup and intragroup in nature. And within an ICA, there is a hierarchy of positions of power or conflict arises in relation to this position. And since each society, whatever be its level of development, has various ICAs, and each ICA has conflicting relations within it, and these all ICAs together contribute to conflict within the society as a whole. And this conflict may be suppressed or resolved through the mechanism of conflicting allegiances and contribute to the stability as a whole. And therefore, according to Dahrendorf, a change or progression occurs in class society from quasi-group, which have only underlying or latent interest, to a situation where there are interest groups which have a common consciousness. And he feels that these are in a similar situation, and therefore, their interests become clear to all of them, that is, these interests become manifest. Thus, while sharing latent interest is an important condition, it does not suffice to create the progression which itself demands communal living and other aspects of culture. And if you see the Dahrendorf theory, there is a key proposition mentioned by Dahrendorf. And to understand the theory, we should analyze, we should go through the all key proposition. First one, he said that more members of quasi-group in ICS can become aware of their objective interest and form a conflict group, the more likely is conflict to occur. So, this is the first important proposition made by him, where he mentioned, within that proposition he mentioned, the more the technical conditions of organization can be met, like leadership, cadre, etc., the more likely is the formation of a conflict group. So, this is one very important proposition made by Dahrendorf, that the more the technical condition of organization can be met, the more likely is formation of a conflict group. He mentioned that the more the political condition of organization can be met, that is by permitting organization oppose interest, the more likely is the formation of conflict group. The more the social condition of organization can be met by permitting quasi group to communicate, the more likely is the formation of conflict group. So, the first proposition, it means that when within the quasi group, the members or the most of the member, when particularly in the imperatively coordinated associations, when they became aware about their own objective interest, and when they form conflict group, then there are more likely is conflict to occur. So, this is the first important thing that he that mentioned by Dahrendorf. Then again you can see, he said the less the technical, political and social conditions of organization are met, the more intense in the conflict. So, when the organization or the members of organization cannot fulfill, cannot get the different technical, political and social conditions, or when they cannot fulfill the social, technical and political condition of the organization, then there is a more intensity of conflict. The next one, the more the deprivation of the subjugated in the distribution of rewards shift from an absolute to relative basis, the more violent is the conflict. So, definitely this is a very common thing, that when there is a deprivation, particularly the subjugated people, but in context of distribution of rewards, when there is a, you can see that in context of distribution of rewards, then when there is a shift from absolute to relative basis, so there is it can increase the violence of conflict. Then again you can see, the less the mobility between super and subordinate group, the more intense is the conflict, because freedom is in the human body, always individual need freedom. When individual cannot mobilize themselves, cannot upgrade themselves from one position to another, then there is a more intensity of the conflict. That's why he mentioned that when there is a less the mobility between super and subordinate group, there is a more intensity the conflict. Then he said that the more intense the conflict, the more structural change and reorganization it will generate. When there will be more intensity of the conflict, obviously it will create different structural change, it will generate different reorganization of the structure. Then the more violent the conflict, the greater is the rate of structural change and reorganization. When the conflict is more violent, then you can see that there is a greater rate of structural change and reorganization of the structure. And therefore, if you see that as a whole, we can see that actually we can conclude one important thing, that Dahrendorf argues that function of conflict, this is to maintain the status quo, and it has a conservative part also to play, and it also aim at bringing change and development also. And when there is a conflict group emerge, they engage in action which lead to changes in social structure, and when it is intense, the change will be radical, and if it will be associated with violence, then definitely there will be structural change will take place suddenly. And thus, according to him, the role of conflict in a society is to maintain a balance between change and status quo. And in ending remarks, therefore, we can say that Dahrendorf posits that class conflict results from the intrinsic structures of authority relations themselves. And he said that class is immersed in a society out of authority given to a person. On the basis of that position, he subordinates other. He said that this positive or negative domination will give birth to two quasi-groups with opposite latent interest. he said that these quasi-groups will organize themselves to form interest groups to fulfill their common goals. And these groups are always in conflict over the matter of preservation or sense of the status quo. And this conflict will bring changes in the structure of social relation through changes in the dominance relation. Therefore, according to him, class is defined in terms of authority and class conflict that revolve around the struggle for authority. So, he argues that it is not the economic relations between superior and subordinates that results in conflict situation. Their main points, however, is the authority that one or some have over the others. So, finally, he said, authority is not the single most factor which determine class. There may be some other factor also. We will have to take in consideration the other factor. So, at last, you can see that this theory has best been utilized in the formation of trade union in modern society. You can see that conflict between employers, employees, this has been institutionalized in terms of an agreed set of rules and procedure, and the net result is increasing stability in industrial society. So, thank you so much. Thank you.